Welcome to the other side of Lucy Letby. In episode 39, I just want to talk about something that is central to this case as well. Central to the practice of medicine and the integrity of science and the administration of justice. We have to remember that the Letby trial was held largely in secret. And we had people like the infamous Dr. A, a supposed friend of Letby, someone who betrayed her because his communication to her very clearly stated that what he witnessed from her was nothing but professional and competent decisions in the patient's interest in every one of the circumstances she was involved with. But for reasons best known to himself, he turned his back on his friend and gave evidence against her. And he gave evidence against her that ran contrary to what actually was happening on the ward. He gave evidence against her that cast her in a bad light, when, if he had any integrity and honesty, he would have depicted this entire unit the way it should have been, as incompetent and uncaring. Time after time, we heard during the trial of suboptimal care. Suboptimal care is a fancy way of saying inhumane care. Of course, as doctors, we can always make mistakes, but we don't set out generally to systematically and continuously make the same mistakes without learning from them and without being honest with the patient. In this case, the mothers and fathers of these children, they didn't get any justice from this hospital. They didn't get honest answers. Some of them even had to seek legal advice to see if they could find out the information about the health of their child. And that information was already lawfully theirs, but it was denied to them. And the trial was the same. Some judge decides on his own to remove the practice of open justice, where everyone can see what's going on and what's being said in court. Courts are public, they are not secret. And this was a secret trial. People standing behind curtains, getting letters instead of their name to protect them from what? Their mental health problems that might arise from it, the effects it might have on their career. What's that got to do with justice? But it is something of our time. This poison that has crept in to Western civilization in the last few decades in particular, hopefully now is going to come to an end. What would Letby's trial have looked like had there been honest and fair reporting of the trial? Would there not have been more alarm at the nonsense that Dowie Evans spouted throughout this trial and subsequently went on to withdraw? The man behaved despicably. He had a despicable record, and he was subject of an extraordinary communication from another senior judge about his unreliability and his worthless opinions. And we know from the Rachel Aviv article that he was planning the methods by which he would eventually depict Letby as a murderer. He tried out poisoning first. When that didn't run, he made up her embolism. He talked about injecting her into babies' stomachs to kill them. Then he changed his mind about that. That's not science. It's voodoo. How many other lives has this man destroyed by these actions because of the secret family courts that he gave evidence in? Then we have Lady Thirlwell decrying people who questioned these verdicts, as is their right to do, and calling us insensitive because we were adding more pain to the parents. No one can add more pain to the parents. Their pain has reached the max. But the secrecy that continues on around the trial of Lucy Letby serves simply to extend that pain indefinitely. Lady Thirlwell is running some kind of inquiry that doesn't seem to have a purpose. It's partially relitigating the case to emphasise that the verdicts were correct, but it's not really getting anywhere in terms of informing the public about the despicable practices in this place. There's not even a comparison made to what a proper level 3 care unit looks like. The Thirlwell inquiry has added nothing to this debacle, apart from the affirmation that many people had that Lucy Letby was a good nurse and a decent person. We find out when the trial is over that the judge didn't think it was prejudicial at all to Letby when one of the jurors admitted discussing her case in public and saying that they had already found her guilty. We've heard nothing from the Criminal Prosecution Service about the flawed data that they used to put her in locations where she wasn't. And she has run the full gamut of so-called British justice. Even when the case was over, on occasions when I spoke to journalists, reputable, decent people, they were afraid to print what was said during the conversation. When did that become the norm in Britain, who effectively gave the world the common law? Something has crept into society, or we have allowed it to creep into society, that has fostered an environment of fear, distrust and abhorrence for the true nature of science. We have to remember where science came from, why the idea of it became so important. It was best put to me by a teacher in school many, many years ago, when he told the story that was supposedly passed on to the philosopher Plato from Socrates. When Socrates was having a discussion with Meno, one of his associates, in the dialogues of Plato, and the discussion was on the nature of the difference between true belief and knowledge, or true opinion and knowledge. And the argument is put like this. Two men want to travel to Larissa, a town outside Athens, and they both individually approach two coach drivers. And one coach driver says that he believes he knows the way to Larissa. And the second coach driver said that he knows the way to Larissa. So they both set out with the two different drivers, and they both arrive in Larissa. So Socrates poses the question, what value was the knowledge of the road to Larissa for the belief of the road to Larissa when they both resulted in the same thing? But it seems fairly straightforward. There was no benefit to the knowledge. But the trick of that story, or the trick of that question, is that it relates to a single event, and that in order to prove the belief, the experiment had to be carried out. They had to make the journey. Once the journey was made, the belief was no longer a belief. It became knowledge. And the difference between knowledge and belief is that knowledge can be structured. Knowledge can be built upon. Knowledge can be passed on reliably. Knowledge can be altered. It can be discarded as no longer relevant, having been wrong all along. So there are enormous differences between true belief and knowledge. And there are thousands of textbooks, millions of journal articles, millions of lectures and lecturers, tutors and teachers all around the world that try to pass on what we think is the correct interpretation of medical symptoms, signs, laboratory findings, scan findings, and also their limitations. We don't make things up with certainty. We might suggest possibilities, but never certainties. We review and seek second opinions. It's necessary that we do this all the time. But knowledge is also subject to experimentation, to proof, unlike belief, which is all that Darry Evans has. And when something doesn't suit him, or when the circumstances catch him out, he changes his beliefs. He's not dealing in knowledge, he's dealing in opinion and belief. And we shouldn't believe a word of it. For all of the diagnoses that he made up, there is no experimental data. There's no repeated body of work which substantiates the things that he says. He opens his mouth and stuff comes out. And when circumstances don't align with what he says, he changes his mind. We don't strut into courts with certainty and theories and I believe and because I ruled out this, it had to be that. It's just utter nonsense. It should have been called out from the very, very start. We're also not told about the pathogens that haunted this place. Pathogenic Pseudomonas. That's only one of them. Forms of biofilm. It cannot be on its own. There has to be other pathogens in that filthy place. And the parents were never told that, and the jury were never told that. More secrecy. Secrecy, secrecy, secrecy was the byword for this trial. Reporting censorship was the hallmark of this trial, apart from the obscene podcasts that went on live throughout it, cherry-picking events and claiming to be an authority on what had happened in the court that day. And this is still going on. With relation to the Thirlwell inquiry, Letby has been accused of harming a baby she was never charged with harming. Letby's been associated with the rise in unintended extubations in the middle of the Thirlwell inquiry. There seems to be no end to it, and no one is allowed to pull these people up on the lies that they're telling. Former employees, friends of Letby, were advised not to give evidence, which is obstruction of justice. We've had many very serious experts in their field come forward after the event to point out the faults in this trial. People who are qualified beyond the dreams even of Darry Evans. But they weren't aware of the trial. They would have given evidence at the time, many have said, but they didn't know about it because the trial was a secret. The investigation was a secret. Darry Evans' pivotal role in the whole affair was a secret. Darry Evans' licensing is a secret. Did he pay for it or did he earn it? Was he properly licensed at the time of the trial? We don't know, because these things are all secret. What were the contents of the letter of Lord Justice Jackson to Justice Goss? What were the contents of that letter? What did he say about Darry Evans? We don't know, because it's a secret. It's amusing also that a member of Parliament, elected by the people to the Parliament, cannot get access to the public record of the trial. Or he can do if he spends £100,000 to do so. Who owns that record of the trial? It belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the court. It doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to the people. That's what democracy is all about. But that's all gone out the window in the last few years. The route of the back passage that didn't have any swipe data on it, the police had got to have known about that, Well, if they didn't, it must have been a pretty lousy investigation. But we don't know about that either, because it's secret too. All the secrets, the many, many secrets of the Lucy Letby trial, we'll probably never know. It isn't just democracy that dies in the dark. Justice dies in the dark as well. But what we had in this case was Dowie Evans and his coterie of experts passing on not knowledge, but belief, which has subsequently become, under the law, true belief or true opinion. But we know that that can change. But the thing that controls all of this, and that outrages me about the trial of Lucy Letby, a person who I have never met and likely will never meet, but who represents something in all of us. Uncertainty, doubt, lack of self-belief, the desire to build on our abilities and knowledge, the desire to build simple lives for ourselves, the desire to be respected, not to be dishonoured by slander, bullying and despicable behaviour from so-called professionals, the desire, in effect, to be left alone, to get on with our own lives, without other people telling us what we have to believe, what we have to think, what we have to say, what we're not allowed to say, what we're not allowed to think. That road is the road to hell. And so many times in history, the best teacher we have seen where this obscene censorship and control of public access to information leads. We have seen how people of bad character are able to exploit situations like this to create false narratives and force us all to react and behave in ways that we wouldn't otherwise. The biggest example of that for me was the gaslighting of people over COVID. That was an abuse of science and an abuse of faith and trust in government and their agencies, including the justice system. In June of 2020, the World Health Organization published a paper from a renowned epidemiologist, John Ioannidis. And John Ioannidis told us at the time, and was proven maybe even over-alarmist at the time, that COVID-19 was largely a disease of elderly comorbid patients, most of whom actually died, certainly in Ireland, in nursing homes where their care was appalling. But for the rest of the population, he broke it into bands, or what he called bins. And for the narrow bins, age bin analysis, the median infection fatality rate, so that's the number of people who will die with infection, was 0.0003% for 0 to 19, 0.02% for 20 to 29, 0.011% for 30 to 39, 0.35% for 40 to 49, 0.12% for 50 to 59, and 0.5% for 60 to 69-year-olds. What's the infection fatality rate for a bad flu? Well, of course, the infection fatality rate changes from year to year and from season to season. But we always get the winter burden of death. And that's to do with absolute humidity. It isn't really much to do with anything else. These viruses are circulating all the time, but it's only in certain climatic conditions that they become more active. But as a generalization, it's always age dependent. So for influenza H3N2, which is often associated with more severe seasons, the estimated case fatality ratios were 4.76% for those over 85 years, 1.4% for those 80 to 84, and 0.49% for those 75 to 79. The general population estimates would vary, but they're usually 0.1% to 0.2%. 0.04% to 0.06% is a typical seasonal infection fatality rate for epidemics of influenza. So COVID-19 was no worse than a typical flu season, or at the very worst, a severe flu season. It is challenging to determine these things exactly because they're complex and have so many variables, but 4 to 5% and typically below 0.2%. But yet, the population was gaslit by government announcements, mainstream media censorship, and all of that other stuff. Non-scientific bullshit that poured out of these TV stations every night. Non-scientists, politicians, speaking on issues about which they knew nothing. Paid actors who were government advisors, raking in millions, gaslighting the entire population. That's what censorship, control of speech, and secrecy does to a society. Do you know anybody who, at this stage, agrees with anything that was done during those catastrophic and costly years of COVID, when the World Health Organization, for corrupt reasons, tore up the rule book that they had written as a consequence of the Spanish flu in 1918, and all of the research that they had carried out into influenza in the years since then. They tore it up, they threw it out the window, and they imported this unscientific nonsense and imprinted it into the minds of gullible people. And in the Letby trial, they excluded so much information that the jury should have heard. The failure of the hospital and the RCPCH report, the cruel and relentless bullying and harassment of Lucy Letby by the so-called consultants in this hospital, the near permanent absence of these consultants in the hospital, the fact that the unit was practically run by half-trained doctors who Ben Myers, in the defence of Lucy Letby, stylised as you were pretty much left to your own devices. In every one of the cases that we see in the Letby trial, the consultants seem to turn up when it's too late, when the decisions have been made that have put this train in motion that is only ever going to end the same way with such vulnerable people. So we can't allow this to happen again. Justice has to be open. Science has to be open to new ideas, to changing your mind, to being skeptical, because science is about skepticism. And these arguments are as old as the hills. They go back even to Socrates, who took his own life because he was accused of corrupting the youth. But really what he was doing was trying to get people to think for themselves. All of us have that capability. It isn't just knowledge that allows us to make wise decisions. Experience does as well. Sharing your experiences through conversation and dialogue that is uncensored and uncontrolled. Sourcing your information from places that you can trust and that don't have any agenda other than telling you the truth to the extent that the truth can ever be told about anything. This is what, to me, the Letby trial represents. Apart from the destruction of this young life, all her hopes, all her dreams, her elderly families, the destruction of her own family, pain, the hurt handed out to everyone involved in this awful thing. It came about because We have given up on the right to free speech. We've given up on the right to express opinions that may be hurtful to other people. But we all know that life is nothing but a series of unfortunate events. All of us suffer these things. All of us are hurt. But the universal things that hurt are ignorance and injustice. And we cannot allow ourselves ever again to be lied to on an industrial scale to avoid having to face scientific facts, because they either don't suit the agenda or there's no profit in them. What use is knowledge? What use is freedom? What use is independence if we're told what we have to think and do with that freedom? It doesn't have any value at all. It isn't a currency worth spending. And we all know that it's going on. We see it every night. And in the case of Lucy Letby, it reached its zenith with a judge telling newspapers what they could and couldn't write, telling people what opinions they could and couldn't have, that it allowed a snake, con man like Darry Evans to sit in the witness stand, pontificating, fabricating, excusing, hiding bad practices, extolling even worse practices. It was the lack of freedom, even at the time, to question this man that at least in part led to the downfall of Lucy Letby. So the other night, whether you like it or not, there was an election in the United States. And whether you like it or not, the United States is still the most powerful country on earth. And the person who won that election may not be someone I would like, may not be someone you would like, but that's irrelevant. It's what he said that's most important. And it's what he said that I look forward to hearing and seeing over the next few years, if God grants me the time to see it. So I'll just finish this little short thought with the man speaking in his own words, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple, just like dominoes, one by one. They'll go down. That's why today I'm announcing my plan to shatter the left-wing censorship regime and to reclaim the right to free speech for all Americans. And reclaim is a very important word in this case because they've taken it away. In recent weeks, bombshell reports have confirmed that a sinister group of deep state bureaucrats, Silicon Valley tyrants, left-wing activists, and depraved corporate news media have been conspiring to manipulate and silence the American people. They have collaborated to suppress vital information on everything from elections to public health. The censorship cartel must be dismantled and destroyed, and it must happen immediately. And here's my plan. First, within hours of my inauguration, I will sign an executive order banning any federal department or agency from colluding with any organization, business, or person to censor, limit, categorize, or impede the lawful speech of American citizens. I will then ban federal money from being used to label domestic speech as mis- or disinformation. And I will begin the process of identifying and firing every federal bureaucrat who has engaged in domestic censorship, directly or indirectly, whether they are the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health, Human Services, the FBI, the DOJ, no matter who they are. Second, I will order the Department of Justice to investigate all parties involved in the new online censorship regime, which is absolutely destructive and terrible, and to aggressively prosecute any and all crimes identified. These include possible violations of federal civil rights law, campaign finance laws, federal election law, securities law, and antitrust laws, the Hatch Act, and a host of other potential criminal, civil, regulatory, and constitutional offenses. To assist in these efforts, I am urging House Republicans to immediately send preservation letters, and we have to do this right now, to the Biden administration, the Biden campaign, and every Silicon Valley tech giant, ordering them not to destroy evidence of censorship. Third, upon my inauguration as president, I will ask Congress to send a bill to my desk revising Section 230 to get big online platforms out of censorship business. From now on, digital platforms should only qualify for immunity protection under Section 230 if they meet high standards of neutrality, transparency, fairness, and non-discrimination. We should require these platforms to increase their efforts to take down unlawful content such as child exploitation and promoting terrorism, while dramatically curtailing their power to arbitrarily restrict lawful speech. Fourth, we need to break up the entire toxic censorship industry that has arisen under the false guise of tackling so-called mis- and disinformation. The federal government should immediately stop funding all nonprofits and academic programs that support this authoritarian project. If any U.S. university is discovered to have engaged in censorship activities or election interferences in the past, such as flagging social media content for removal of blacklisting, those universities should lose federal research dollars and federal student loan support for a period of 5 years and maybe more. We should also enact new laws laying out clear criminal penalties for federal bureaucrats who partner with private entities to do an end run around the Constitution and deprive Americans of their First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment rights. In other words, deprive them of their vote. And once you lose those elections, and once you lose your borders like we have, you no longer have a country. Furthermore, to confront the problems of major platforms being infiltrated by legions of former deep staters and intelligence officials, there should be a 7-year cooling-off period before any employee of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DNI, DHS, or DOD is allowed to take a job at a company possessing vast quantities of U.S. user data. Fifth, the time has finally come for Congress to pass a digital Bill of Rights. This should include a right to digital due process. In other words, government officials should need a court order to take down online content, not send information requests such as the FBI was sending to Twitter. Furthermore, when users of big online platforms have their content or accounts removed, throttled, shadow banned, or otherwise restricted, no matter what name they use, they should have the right to be informed that it's happening, the right to a specific explanation of the reason why, and the right to a timely appeal. In addition, all users over the age of 18 should have the right to opt out of content moderation and curation entirely and receive an unmanipulated stream of information if they so choose. The fight for free speech is a matter of victory or death for America and for the survival of Western civilization itself. When I am president, this whole rotten system of censorship and information control will be ripped out of the system at large. There won't be anything left. By restoring free speech, we'll begin to reclaim our democracy and save our nation.
Thank you, and God bless America. Bye.